What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Friday, June 23rd edition of the MLB Sims video. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. And we have a 10-game MLB slate on DraftKings tonight on the main slate. And we're going to look at the MLB Sims tool for that slate. It's a Coors Field slate, so we have a lot of ownership coming into that game in general, the Los Angeles Angels specifically. And we're going to look at this tool to kind of give us an idea of how we can deal with that ownership, what some of the best approaches may be. To set up the simulation, I created 2,000 lineups. I capped player exposures similarly to our ownership projections, so they should be more or less in line with what we're expecting the field to do. I ran a bunch of 5-man stacks, didn't put in any forced secondary stacks, so that's a little bit different than how the field's going to look, but for the sake of simplicity and time, it's good enough for this video. Gives us a decent idea. We still have, a lot of all 5-man stacks, which we know the field's going to do a lot of. And so we can take a look at some different approaches and different ways to handle that Coors Field ownership. If you're watching the video, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up on YouTube, like it on Twitter. Both of those things help us out quite a bit. Now let's get into it. Starting here, we have the lineups sorted by simulated ROI. Just looking at some of the top lineups, we have a 5-man Toronto stack, a lot of 5-man Angel stacks, another Toronto stack. Seattle here against Kyle Gibson, Colorado on the other side of the Coors Field game. So nothing too surprising there. If you look at the top stacks tool, which I realize you can't see on this video, so just take my word for it, but the Angels are coming in first in top stack percentage. The Blue Jays are second. The Rockies are third. Seattle's middle of the pack, but their stack score is a little bit higher. So not surprising to see those teams showing up the most. The big question will be exactly what do those lineups look like, because for the most part, those teams are getting ownership as well. The Angels are the most popular stack on the slate. The Blue Jays are second. The Rockies are third. So if we are going to these teams, we need to find ways to be contrarian while doing it. Now, looking at the individual lineups, here, this top one, 5-man Toronto stack, like I said, second most popular stack on the slate. But the thing that stands out is that you do have Patrick Sandoval, who is facing the Rockies in Colorado. Obviously a very, very risky play, but he's not going to be popular. We currently have him projected for 4% ownership at $6,800. So he's offering value. He's offering very little ownership. He is facing a weak Colorado team. Clearly, it's not a safe play. It's not a play you're expecting to work out all that often. But when it does, it is helping you differentiate this Blue Jay stack. You have Brian Bayo, who also is pulling around 12% ownership right now. As far as the one-offs, solid one-offs here, you have Francisco Alvarez, always going to be one of the better catching options. The Mets have about a 4.8 implied run total in Philly. You have Fernando Tatis on a Padres team that has a 5.5 implied run total. And then you have a cheap Pablo Reyes value piece for the Red Sox. The next lineup we have here is a 5-man Angel stack. The pitching, again, you have Patrick Sandoval, like I said, pulling about 4% ownership. Logan Gilbert works as a contrarian option as well. He's expensive at $9,800 against the Orioles. He's only projected for about 7% ownership. So you have a combined 11 to 12% ownership coming in on your pitchers. That allows you to go a little bit chalkier with your bats. And then also worth noting in this particular lineup, it's not the most popular Angels bats either. You have Shohei Ohtani in here, who clearly you expect to be popular, although he is $6,700. But you're going to the bottom of the order here. Chad Wallach, Stefanich, Velasquez, Taylor Ward at the top. So it's an Angels wraparound stack that's going to naturally save some ownership as well, since the bulk of the ownership is going to go to the top. Michael Stefanich only projected for 7% ownership on DraftKings, Velasquez 9, Wallach 10. Or 12 rather. So those are the 3 lowest owned hitters on the Angels. Ohtani's actually projected to be the 4th lowest owned because he's so expensive. And then Taylor Ward is the most popular. So this is it's close to as low owned an Angel stack as you can make. The one-offs, again, Fernando Tatis, Jake Berger, high upside, relatively inexpensive third base option. Starling Marte in a good spot for the Mets. Angels, again, here, James Caprillion, another terrible pitcher, but he's low owned. So if he happens to pitch well, which, just happens a decent amount of the time for any pitcher, you're helping to differentiate there. Kodai Senga is very similar to Logan Gilbert in that he is expensive, but he's one of the expensive pitchers that isn't getting much ownership. We have him second in top 2 pitcher percentage, but only getting 8% ownership right now. So he's actually showing up a lot in these lineups, as you'll see in a minute. But he's a very good way to differentiate. And then again, within the Angels stack, you see a bottom of the order stack again, Wallach, Rengifo, Velasquez, with Ohtani and Ward at the top. So that seems to maybe be a common trend with the individual Angel stacks. Looking at this one here, Sheehan, Senga. So again, using Senga to differentiate, and Sheehan's not that popular either. Wallach, Otani, Renhefo with Trout and Ward. So 3 of the lower owned Angels here. So that seems to be a trend that we are seeing with these Angels 5-mans. Now to look at to look at the exposures, if we sort by simulated ROI and then take our top 150, looking at the stack exposures, we see the Angels coming in most frequently, Toronto second, Mets third, Colorado fourth. So we're not getting too far away from the top stacks tool in terms of order. The Mets are fifth in top stack percentage. The Rockies, like I said, third, Toronto second, Angels first. So pretty much, sticking with that. But as we were seeing with the Angels stack and with the Blue Jay stacks we were looking at, you're finding ways within those stacks to still be different, whether it's using players from the bottom of the order, whether it's using contrarian pitchers. You can be doing both. If you look at the individual player exposures, Kodai Senga is being used a ton. I mentioned that before. I'll be interested to see if his ownership projection comes up later on in the day, but right now we have him projected to be going very under-owned. This is a slate with really questionable pitching, so the fact that Senga has a tough matchup against Philly isn't really disqualifying, given that the popular pitchers have huge question marks as well. You have one of the best strikeout pitchers on the slate, not getting much ownership. It's a pretty easy way to differentiate, and it'll allow you to still keep using the Angels and the Blue Jays, the stacks that you really want to get to. Looking at hitter exposures, something I talk about a lot. Hunter Renfroe coming in at the top at 27%. So makes me think that the data loaded into the sim is the lineups that I loaded in are probably pretty solid. You don't see any hitters just running away as unbelievable options. So ownership was probably pretty much in line with where we expect them to be and with their chances of success. But you see individual Angels hitters here at the top: Renfroe, Ward, Drury, Renhefo, Otani. Your top 5 hitters in terms of exposure. Tovar sneaks in from Colorado as a value option at shortstop. Then you get to Mike Trout, Fernando Tatis. Notable here that Patrick Sandoval's getting 18% exposure. He showed up in that top lineup that we talked about. Again, really risky spot, but he's not a bad pitcher overall. His strikeout stuff this year has been lower than expected, lower than previous years. We have seen back-to-back good strikeout games from him, so maybe the strikeouts start to come back, but he is good at limiting power, and the Rockies aren't very good. So at a cheap price tag and very little ownership, taking some shots on Sandoval isn't the worst idea in the world. Then you start getting into some Toronto bats, cheap Merrifield, cheap Belt. Wallach shows up, inexpensive Danny Jansen, low-owned Clark Schmidt. Joe Musgrove is one of the most popular pitchers on the slate, so it's noteworthy he's coming in at 15%. This is something where you have to keep in mind your lineups sort of all work together. If you're not playing a lot of Angels, not playing a lot of Toronto, you should expect your Musgrove exposure to be going up because that's going to afford you the opportunity to get to what projects as the best pitcher on the slate, all things considered. But when you're going to the Angels, when you're going to the Blue Jays, if you then put Musgrove in those lineups, you're starting to get really chalky, and it becomes really difficult to actually have your lineup get to the top of the field. If we go in here and unselect our lineups, sort by win percentage. This is a strategy that I think you can make a case for in your largest field tournaments. Simulated ROI is generally going to be your best bet overall. But when you're talking about these top heavy tournaments, for example, DraftKings tonight in particular, $5 tournament, almost 60,000 entries with 50K to first, you might be willing to take on a little bit more win equity in exchange for cash equity. And that's going to hurt your simulated ROI, but it's going to give you a better chance of just getting that 50K first place prize. So just to see sort of what the differences are, if you take these top 150 lineups, go back to the exposures, the Angels, Toronto, Mets, still the top 3 stacks, but Mets exposure stayed pretty similar at 11%. You see the Angels drop to 18%, Toronto's at 13%. You start to mix in some more of these other contrarian teams that we weren't really getting to before. In terms of player exposures, Kodai Senga still coming in a lot. You see the Angels hitter still towards the top, but just raw exposure dropping down a little bit. So not major changes, but a little bit different than if you sort by simulated ROI. So that's an early look at tonight's slate. Again, things are going to change as ownership changes, lineups come out. But it seems like for us right now, using our Sims tool, getting to these popular offenses is the approach that we're looking to take. Still getting to the Angels, still getting to Toronto. Very willing to sacrifice chalk pitching to get some low-owned, risky pitching options. And that makes a lot of sense on a slate like this, where you have a few offenses that really stand out as top spots, and you have a lot of mediocre pitching where some are a lot more popular than others, but they're all very, very similar in terms of range of outcomes. So that is what I would expect to see. I think it makes a lot of sense. You can explain it pretty easily. And so that's our look at the slate using the MLB Sims tool. Thank you for checking out the video. Good luck on your lineups tonight. I will be back on the deeper dive at 4:45 Eastern. If you want to check that out for a game-by-game breakdown. But that's it. So thanks for checking this out, and good luck tonight.